It took me nearly 10 years to finally have a house in my name. And less than 2 days later, my husband announced, "My sister and her 3 kids are moving in. Don't argue. I've made up my mind." I stood frozen, because that woman was the very one who looked down on me more than once. Lena never dreamed of big things. She didn't need a fancy house, a car, or weekend getaways at resorts. All she wanted was a small home with a porch wide enough to hang a few pots of geraniums, a tidy kitchen that smelled faintly of cinnamon, and a little workspace where she could sit quietly by her old sewing machine, stitching one thread at a time, just like she'd been piecing her life back together for over a decade. She and her husband, Mark, had lived in 4 different rentals. Each one had something permanently broken. Jammed windows, leaking pipes, a ceiling so moldy no amount of scrubbing could fix it. Mark was a plumber, ironically, but they never had enough money to fix anyone's home, let alone their own. Lena worked as a seamstress, running a tiny mending shop wedged between a donut store and an old bookstore. She never made much, but her customers loved her. They'd bring pastries and stories along with their torn dresses and busted zippers. That spring, they finally signed a contract to buy a small house tucked away in a quiet neighborhood, just a short walk from town. On move-in day, Lena brought her grandmother's rocking chair, some coarse fabric, a wooden box filled with colored thread, and an old window frame she'd rescued back when she was still an apprentice, the only thing she kept from the days when she had nothing. The house wasn't new. It even smelled a little damp behind the walls. But to Lena, it was a dream made real, something with doors she could close without asking anyone's permission. That first night, Mark brought home 2 burgers and a bottle of apple soda, the same one they used to drink when they were dating. They sat on the floor because they hadn't bought a table yet, eating in silence, listening to the wind slip through the unsealed cracks in the doors. Lena felt happiness seeping slowly, like warm water, quiet, but softening every hardened place inside her. She looked up at the ceiling and imagined painting it cream, hanging string lights. The house wasn't perfect, but in her heart, it was hers. At least, that's what she believed. 3 days after moving into the new house, Lena was still busy soaking the curtains in the wash basin, the little floral one she had sewn herself to fit the exact size of their windows, when Mark walked with a look she couldn't quite read. She heard the door click shut, the sound of his boots landing on the welcome mat. He stood awkwardly in the entryway, still holding a steaming box of tacos. "Emily and the kids are coming this afternoon," Mark said, like he was announcing a delayed delivery, not a decision that would upend the fragile sense of order she'd just begun to build. Just for a few weeks. Her apartment's too small. The kids don't even have a place to sleep. Lena turned around. The water in the basin still fizzed with white suds. She wiped her hands on the edge of her apron, the air suddenly heavy, pressed down like a spool of thick thread. She asked, her voice barely above a breeze, but each word dropping like stone. "And where exactly will they stay?" "Here, of course. We've got 2 bedrooms. We'll take the small one. Kids need more space." That simple sentence, "kids need more space," was like scissors slicing through the delicate seam Lena had tried so hard to keep from unraveling. She looked at Mark. He was busy taking off his jacket, not looking at her, as if everything had already been decided, as if she was just the last one to be informed, as if this house were some shared asset being repurposed, and not the reward she had saved for penny by penny. She remembered the night they put down the deposit. Mark had joked, "Guess that means you can hang as many lace curtains as you want now." She had laughed, her heart soft as cotton. But now, her heart felt like a tangled thread, tight, knotted, with no clear way out. "Did you even ask me?" she said, still trying to keep her voice calm. Mark exhaled like he just crawled out of a crawl space under someone's house. "I knew you wouldn't like it, but you got a heart, Lena. You're not cold. They're my family." Lena said nothing. She turned back to the basin, but this time, her hands were trembling so badly, she couldn't even lift the fabric. That afternoon, Lena sat motionless by the window, in her workspace. The small room she had once imagined as her quiet sanctuary now felt fragile, like something that might disappear the moment an unfamiliar foot crossed the threshold. On the desk sat her steel fabric scissors, the handle worn smooth with use, lying silently beside a scattered pile of unfinished cloth. The colors clashed. The ideas were stalled. She hadn't touched a single thing since Mark said they're moving in. A car engine hummed in the distance, making its way up the incline. The crunch of gravel under tires made Lena look up. Through the curtain, she saw a silver SUV pull up abruptly in front of the gate. The door swung open. Emily stepped out first, her hair neatly braided, wearing leggings and a slightly wrinkled hoodie, but still put together. 3 kids clambered out after her, each dragging a backpack or an oversized duffel. Mark came out of the house to help carry their things. He smiled, patting Emily's shoulder. Emily didn't smile. She scanned the yard. Her gaze passed over the patch of lavender Lena had just planted, drifted up the porch, and then, just for a second, her eyes met Lena's, watching from the upstairs window. No nod, no wave, just a quick, hollow glance, almost distant, before she turned away, as if no one had been watching at all. Lena stepped into the living room, just as Emily crossed the threshold. "Lena," Emily said, not warmly, not coldly, just like reading a name off a list. The kids had already scattered, one of them bumping into the coffee table and knocking over a pot of succulents Lena had nurtured since their rental days. No one apologized. Emily dropped her bag onto the floor, standing with her hands on her hips like someone touring a model home. "Not bad. At least there's natural light. My old place was dark as a cave." Mark gently pulled Lena aside, lowering his voice like he was negotiating at a flea market. "Just for a little while, okay? Emily's hanging by a thread. I think we should help." Lena looked at Mark, then at Emily's mud-caked shoes on a hand-woven rug she'd just bought from a native women's shop in town. She didn't say a word, but her throat began to burn, not with anger, but with something older, something she thought she'd long buried. That feeling of being the last to be asked, if asked at all. Mark took her silence as agreement. He always did. 2 weeks in, and Lena barely recognized her own home anymore. Mornings began with the thudding of feet across the wooden floor. Not hers, not Mark's, but the kids as they tore through the house, racing from the living room to the kitchen and back again, leaving socks, shoes, and cookie crumbs in their wake like a small tornado. The sewing room Lena had once claimed as her own had been taken over by Emily as her temporary resting space because, as she put it, "The light's better here, feels less stuffy," as if that statement was permission enough. One morning, Lena walked into the kitchen and found her fabric scissors, kept locked in a drawer for safekeeping, lying on the counter, smeared with peanut butter. She stared at them for a long moment, feeling a strange kind of emptiness, like a box that's already hollow, yet still somehow managed to be broken. Emily was in the living room, one earbud in, eyes locked on her laptop. "Did you take my scissors?" Lena asked quietly. Emily didn't look up. The kid did, thought they were sandwich cutters. "I told her to leave them. It's fine, just wipe them off." Lena turned away, saying nothing, back in the bedroom. She opened the dresser drawer and froze. Her underwear drawer had been filled with toys. A Barbie in a wedding dress was sprawled across her ivory silk nightgown, the one she saved for special nights. She caught sight of herself in the mirror, hair messy, dark circles under her eyes, one hand holding the wrinkled gown, the other clenched tightly around the doorknob. That night, after a dinner Emily had hastily thrown together with still wet boiled noodles, Lena found Mark sprawled on the couch, eyes glued to a soccer match. She stood in front of him long enough that he finally looked up. "I can't do this anymore, Mark." He frowned. "Because of the scissors? I told you, the kids just..." "It's not about the scissors," Lena cut in. Her voice wasn't loud, but each word was sharp as upholstery thread. "It's because every time I step through that door, I feel like I no longer exist here." Mark sat upright, startled by the undercurrent in her eyes. "Lena, they're my family. They need us. And this house is mine, too." She nodded slowly. "Yes, but it's mine, too. And that has never been respected." She walked out of the room. Mark didn't follow. He figured she was just being overly sensitive. He always did. Lena woke up on Sunday morning with a weight on her chest, as if someone had placed a slab of concrete there while she slept. The sky outside the window was overcast. A breeze slipped into the unsealed cracks, carrying the damp scent of last night's rain. From the kitchen came Emily's sharp voice, echoing like glass. "Who left the bread open like this? It's all dried out." A child squealed, then burst into giggles. Lena didn't move. Her hand reached for the edge of the bed, not to find anything, but as if to check whether she was still in the place she once called home. This room no longer felt like the nest where she and Mark once built dreams. It was now a holding space for a woman who used to laugh at her small-town seamstress job, a playground where children spilled milk on a rug and ran off, leaving behind half-hearted apologies from a mother too distracted to care. She sat up, slipped on her robe, and stepped into the hallway. Each footfall felt like she was stepping on the shadow of her former self. In the kitchen, Emily was stuffing bread into the toaster. Mark sat at the table, staring at his phone, sipping coffee. He didn't look up. Lena stood there for a few seconds. Then she turned away and walked into her sewing room. The sewing table had been pushed to the side. Her beloved sewing machine, once treated like a treasure, was now buried under a mess of crumpled kid drawings. Lena stared at the needle, where a strand of blue thread still hung, half pulled through. She used to love that shade of blue. Now it sat there useless, just like her. She turned and went back to the bedroom, opened the closet, pulled out the gray suitcase they had used for their beach trip 3 years ago, the last time she and Mark went away, just the two of them. She didn't fold her clothes, just stuffed them in dresses, shirts, socks, not out of urgency, but because it had been so long since she was allowed to make a choice that belonged only to her. Before leaving, she wrote a short note and stuck it to the bathroom mirror, where she knew Mark would see it. "I'm leaving for a few days. Don't call. I need to find my own voice again." As she stepped outside, the rain had started to fall, just a fine, misty drizzle. Lena didn't open an umbrella. She walked to the bus stop at the edge of town, hand clenched tightly around the suitcase handle, feet hitting each puddle as if the cold shock was the only thing that could convince her she was really leaving. She didn't know where she was going. She had no plan. She only knew this. If she stayed, she would disappear from her own life. And this time, no one had the right to ask her to sacrifice again. 3 days later, Lena sat alone in a small upstairs room of an old inn near the lake. The window was slightly open, letting in the scent of damp leaves and the distant songs of unfamiliar birds. The room was bare, just a creaky wooden bed, a wobbly writing desk, and a foggy mirror hanging slightly crooked on the wall. But to Lena, this place was enough to breathe. She hadn't sewn a thing, even though her suitcase was packed with fabric. Her hands still instinctively touched the folds, felt the seams, but her mind was blank. She didn't sleep well, but at least she no longer dreamed of strangers walking into her home without knocking. Texts from Mark came every night. At first, they were brief. "Are you okay?" Then longer. "Emily will leave soon. I know I was wrong not to ask you. I just wanted to keep my family together. I didn't realize I was trading away the one I built with you. Lena, I'm sorry. Will you come back?" She didn't reply, not out of anger, but because she still hadn't forgotten what it felt like to be a stranger in her own home. On the 4th morning, the innkeeper, a Ukrainian woman named Nadia, brought her a cup of chamomile tea and said in thickly accented English, "You have the eyes of someone who just fell out of themselves." Lena laughed softly, shaking her head. "Something like that," she said. They didn't talk much after that, but that single sentence stayed with her the entire morning. She thought about the first time she met Mark, how he crouched under the sink to fix a leaky faucet at her sewing shop, telling stories about how he used to take apart his toys as a kid to see what was inside. She had fallen in love with how he listened to every word she said, how he kept things simple, safe. But somewhere along the way, that simplicity turned into assumption, that safety turned into silence, and the listening had quietly vanished. That afternoon, Lena returned to town. No warning. She didn't go home. She went to the sewing shop. The key was still in her coat pocket. The smell of fabric, of wood, of sunlight caught in the curtains wrapped around her chest like a slow squeeze. The sewing machine sat right where she left it. On the little sign hanging by the front door, the words Lena's Alterations. We fixed more than clothes had faded with time, but they were still there. Once again, Lena sat down on her round wooden stool. She gently turned the machine's hand wheel, threading that same soft blue string to the eye of the needle. For the first time in months, she sewed a single line of stitches, not for anyone else, not for the bills, not for Mark, not for Emily, not for praise, just for herself. Lena's story isn't about a loud rebellion or a dramatic breakthrough. It's the quiet yet fierce journey of a woman who had grown used to enduring and, for the first time, dared to say enough to the things that were slowly wearing her down. Lena didn't leave out of hatred, and she didn't stay out of resignation. She walked away to reclaim her voice, the one worn thin by years of sacrificing for family, of staying silent to keep the peace, of being dismissed under the guise of kindness. The biggest lesson here isn't about fighting someone else, but about learning to stand up for yourself before you disappear from your own life. Some dreams are small, like a quiet home, a sewing corner, but they take enormous courage to protect. And sometimes, leaving isn't about walking away. It's about returning to yourself. Thank you for staying with Lena's story all the way to the end. If you ever found yourself in a similar situation, where you had to stay silent to keep the peace, or shrink yourself so others could feel comfortable, feel free to share in the comments. And if you have a story of your own, don't hesitate to tell it. You never know who might need to hear it to feel less alone. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay connected with the channel, where every voice deserves to be heard.